Welcome, everyone. We are very excited to, Tonya and I are very excited to have you at our very first LinkedIn Live session. We've titled this Reimbursement Realities. And these conversations are really meant to be candid, informative conversations and have lots of participation from the audience. So you'll see that the comments, and there's a comment box right to your right. You can text that if you have a topic you want to talk about, if you have a question, if you have an opinion about something we just said. We would love for you to join in the conversation and make this really interactive, because the whole reason we're doing this is to answer your questions and to bring this conversation into the market. We will be having these sessions once a month. They'll last 30 to 45 minutes. And this time, 116 people signed up to join us. So welcome, everyone. And we're really excited that you're here. We thought we would start out with some introductions. My name is Stephanie DeFelice, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Marketing with PRIA Healthcare. I've been in MedTech for 16 years now. Started out in sales, spent about a decade selling medical devices and capital equipment into hospitals and specialty physician offices. Learned a lot about reimbursement in that space and about how when things go well, how important that is. And then also seen it when things didn't go so well in the reimbursement space and how vital and important that is to get that back on track. So after spending about a decade on that side of the business, I really moved into this innovation ecosystem, which for MedTech innovation ecosystem. So I spent about 4 years in product development, working with a research and development company out of Silicon Valley. And then spent the last year working with market access experts like Tonya here at PRIA Healthcare. So what I love is that all of this background really, it shows you like how reimbursement, quality, regulatory, and reimbursement all go hand in hand for successful commercialization. So my colleague here is joining me. Her name's Tonya Dowd. She's our Executive Vice President of Reimbursement, Value Generation, and Market Access. Now, Tonya, you've been in market access for a long time. I think you're a little bit of a savant. You started when you were 5. Is it 5?
Well, I started actually, Stephanie, when I was 2, but who's counting? In all seriousness, when I started out in this arena back in the 90s, I can't even believe I'm saying that. So I'm really dating myself here, but it was a much different ecosystem. And in particular, to give some specifics, CMS was HCFA, right? So they've changed their name. They were the Healthcare Financing Administration at the time. They operated payments to facilities in the outpatient setting, for example, based on costs and charges. So there was no prospective payment system. There were no Category 3 codes as we know them today. They hadn't yet been established. So I remember going to HCFA frequently for a few years, really, and sitting down with the staff there and negotiating a physician fee schedule for an enlisted code. So it was very... I don't want to say it was renegade, but it was a little bit it wasn't just not formalized in terms of how new medical technologies and novel innovation would be paid. There were also 26 Medicare contractors versus the MAC consolidation that we have today. And they held in-person meetings. They were called Carrier Advisory Committee meetings, which you could attend as an interested stakeholder and really observe all of the different specialty representation from that Medicare contractors area. We would talk about what was called previously local medical review policies, or LMRPs, which are now called LCDs today. So there's lots of acronyms here, but the point is that there was more access to decision makers. I think that the MedTech industry had definitely more influence and could really influence and could help essentially CMS and other decision makers really make decisions on how they would pay for new and novel technologies. So I think a lot's changed. And I think just with respect to kind of, going back to my background, again, I started out in this world of healthcare and market access and reimbursement in the 90s. And so again, dating myself, but, really worked with a small medical device company starting out. Nobody really knew what to do with reimbursement because it was cost and charge based. So I really helped pioneer for new medical technologies, the prospective payment systems that exist now, and the new technology add-on payment program, the transitional pass-through payment program. I lived through the era of implementation of Category 3 codes, which really, I believe, have really truly changed the dynamic and have been a pivotal piece of the difference in the days of yore versus today. I spent about 12 and a half years at Johnson & Johnson, working primarily, in developing reimbursement strategy, but I got to have a really good focus and line of sight of working on new and novel technologies that weren't yet commercialized. They were in the R&D phase, they were in the clinical phase. So working with the team to understand, upstream what needs to be considered in terms of clinical, validation, clinical studies, the regulatory framework and strategy, and then how that would affect really the downstream commercialization and market adoption of the technology. So that was really, really enlightening. And then I spent, a few years at MICRA, which, I really helped develop the reimbursement team there. So I got to work with very esteemed colleagues there in the regulatory, group. And we worked very closely, especially on breakthrough devices and the implications on reimbursement. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But really have had a good line of sight and good experience in terms of what happens early on in development of a medical technology and what needs to be considered so we do have downstream commercialization and market adoption. And I think with respect to this venue that we're establishing, Stephanie,
Yep.
This reminds me of a reimbursement networking group I started several years ago, about 20 years ago, and we called it the Reimbursement Grapevine.
I
And
like
so
that.
yeah, do you like that? So that was, I don't know if it was for my love of wine or that it was California based or a little bit of both. But we actually had really a good consortium of reimbursement professionals at the time. The idea was to come together, and we came together in person because it wasn't commonplace to do Zoom calls and Teams calls, right, at the time. So
Yep.
we came together physically, at different venues, mainly in California, to share best practices and discuss some common challenges, which we all had. And we had guest speakers, and one I hold in very high regard, and the participants may know him, Mitch Sugarman. And he was the former head of medical technology assessment at Kaiser, and then subsequently worked for many years at Medtronic. Mitch is now living the good life. He is retired from reimbursement, and I think all things healthcare considered. But really, really adore him, and he made a great impact on that networking group. So I think we share the same vision here with respect to this LinkedIn Live series. In really having interested parties, I can't stress enough, from the community. So this includes MedTech, right, staff, investors, policymakers, reimbursement and market access professionals, providers, whoever it may be that have an interest in market access and reimbursement in the US. So again, we encourage participation here. This is a dialogue. This is not myself and Stephanie, doing a didactic, but we really want audience participation. So
yeah, so please share your opinions. I mean, we would love to start out by hearing if anyone that's tuning in has a similar experience that Tonya does. If that's been your experience, and if you have any opinions on the progression and the changes that have happened here in reimbursement and market access over the last 30 years. So we'd love to hear more about that. So please share.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Tonya, speaking of changes, something that immediately comes to mind is the hot topic of late, right? The TSET, Transitional Coverage for Emerging Technologies, formerly known as MCIT. I know we think that that the program is a possibility for a finite number of MedTech companies for technologies, but should it be viewed or considered as a silver bullet? What do you think?
Yeah, and it's an excellent question, and I would say that that it's not a silver bullet, and I'll explain, in my opinion, and I'll explain why in a minute. The Stanford Byers publication, I'm not sure if the audience is familiar with this, but they did a study, and they found that on average, it takes about 5 to 7 years, and the investor community might want to hold their ears, but to establish true and broad market adoption and reimbursement, reliable reimbursement, coding, coverage, and payment.
Tonya, we're not trying to scare anyone away.
No, we're not trying to scare anyone away, but this is the truth. And it has been, in my experience, it has panned out to be true. Now, I think that the current TSET, the Transitional Coverage for Emerging Technologies notice and program, is a good step in the right direction. Again, it was formerly MCIT, Medicare Coverage for Innovative Technologies, that was disbanded back in I think 2021. But the TSET was proposed, and notice came out last year, about mid-year last year. And what this proposes to do is it proposes to create a coverage and reimbursement pathway only for breakthrough designated devices. And again, breakthrough designation comes from FDA, not from CMS. So CMS is proposing to provide a coverage pathway, coding pathway, payment pathway to facilitate early and predictable and safe access for their beneficiaries to new technology. And they want to reduce, of course, the manufacturer's uncertainty about coverage and encourage evidence development if evidence gaps exist. Well, I think that most folks who have been in this industry would agree that when you launch a product, even if it is PMA approved by the FDA, you still lack evidence for the payers and the provider community. So there is going to be an evidence gap, right? So the focus here from the TSET is really on evidence, right? And in my opinion, and I would love to hear others' opinions, is it's just a coverage with evidence development process that CMS currently has in place, but for breakthrough designated devices. So I believe that there are some obvious limitations in the current proposed notice. And again, this is by no means, in play right now. So I think there is some, in having conversations with some in the industry, I do think there's some confusion. There's some misperceptions in the industry about what TSET is. But it is, again, for only breakthrough designated devices. And again, that breakthrough designation can be applied to any device that's going through 510K clearance, 510K de novo, or a PMA process. And it's given before you're given any type of clearance or approval, before for FDA. It does not, the TSET rule or program would not apply to commercial payers, Medicaid, or workers' compensation. So if we're thinking about, and again, in the strategy of your commercialization strategy, thinking about who's my patient population? What is the payer mix, right? Medicare, as we know, sets the baseline for payment and policy in this country, but they're not the only payer, as we would all.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So, and only devices that fall into an existing benefit category will qualify. So there's a lot of innovation in, for example, the digital health space that wouldn't necessarily qualify because there's no benefit category, right? So, absolutely. And then the last piece that I'll say in terms of some of the limitations are, it's only limited to a certain finite number of technologies. So CMS specifically states in their notice that they only anticipate receiving 8 nominations per year, but will only have the capacity to carry out and accept 5 candidates per year.
Oh, wow.
Now, Stephanie, let me ask you, how many technologies do we know that want to get breakthrough designation so they can participate in this program? I can name
more than 5 or 8, so
at least 20 myself. And again, would love to hear from the audience what their experience has been. But it is, I don't know. I think that CMS might be surprised that they will receive a lot more requests. And again, this voluntary program, but I do believe also, and again, this is where I think there's a lot of confusion. There are many in the industry, I think, who, when we ask, what is your reimbursement strategy? They say, I'm going to apply to the TSET program, unbeknownst, or thinking that it's already in place, right? Which we know it's not.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, again, moving in the right direction, it's going to, hopefully provide a good pathway for access for Medicare beneficiaries. And again, Medicare Advantage plans will need to follow, because by statute they have to follow what CMS is doing in terms of coverage. But I think the message for the MedTech community here is it's a journey, it's a marathon, it is not a sprint. But evidence, and that's the big piece that's changed from previous, is evidence is king.
Absolutely.
And really having a solid evidence, end-to-end evidence generation plan is absolutely positively critical, because what you have for FDA, even for a PMA approval, is not sufficient. And that is a big part of the TSET program as well, is in order to provide that transitional coverage, think about coverage with evidence development. You have to have, as the manufacturer, the burden is on you to have an evidence development plan, or EDP, and it's spelled out in their notice. And that's, the commercial payers, the same thing. Everybody is requiring a higher level of evidence than they ever have. And I think it's really, really, it's difficult, because as a medical device manufacturer, you're trying to appease so many different stakeholders, right? And we talk about evidence. I always say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So at the level of evidence you have, and the quality of the evidence is really in the eye of the beholder. So you're going to have to really understand, what do the hospitals need to see? What do the physicians need to see? What do the payers need to see in terms of what type of evidence is going to get them to adopt your technology? So evidence.
Absolutely. Yeah, that stakeholder, and understanding who that is and who you're talking to, and what you need to inform them about, is highly important. Tonya, yes. I can't think of a thing that we do that doesn't involve evidence, that we don't use the evidence that our partners produce, that we don't use it to support our efforts in market access and reimbursement. So it's vital.
That's why in our naming convention, yes. The department is reimbursement, evidence, or reimbursement value generation, and market access. Exactly. It's about that. The crux in the middle is that value generation.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to give a reminder to the audience that this is interactive. So we've gotten a couple comments, which we love. Thank you. But we would also love some topics that you'd like to hear more about, or some questions that you have. So don't forget to share those with us, so that we can talk about them live right now. Opinions on TSET, or really anything about evidence generation, would be great. So just pop it in there, share it in the comments, and we'll talk about it right now. But you were chatting about, you mentioned something very interesting, and it's something that we see every single day, are these new and novel technologies that are coming to market that are not under a benefit category. Right. Let's talk more about those technologies. Let's talk more about people who have digital therapeutics and other novel AI devices that don't seem to truly fit under that coding, coverage, and payment traditional kind of payment structure and mechanism. Where do we start? What if you're a technology like that? Where do you start? How do you go about planning your market access and reimbursement strategy?
Yeah. Well, I think if we think about the traditional convention of, let's just take physician payment, okay, right? For digital health or AI type of technologies, and I'll just bucket it. I know there's subsets and there's details here, but if we think about the traditional configuration of a CPT code, category 1, that is, it's based on relative value units, right, for the physician work and the practice expense and malpractice expense. But really the two key are the physician work and the practice expense. Well, if we think about the many new digital health technologies, AI technologies, the physician work is being replaced by the actual tool, right? So there's no physician work that's really required, except for making a decision, having a decision point. But there's unlike a surgical procedure where the physician is going in, it's taking, him or her a lot of time to do the procedure. it's a very different construct. So I think by and large, the current CPT configurations and payment methodologies for these new technologies, that it doesn't align, right? So there's the DIMPAG, which is the Digital Payment Policy Group at AMA, is doing a lot of work, and they've been, really trying to resolve this issue and figure out the right pathway. But by and large, they don't fit into a traditional, right, reimbursement model. So what do these new innovators really have to do? Well, Viz AI is a great example of one technology that actually got a new technology add-on payment for the hospitals, right, because it really did. And again, I'll go back to evidence, because they had the evidence to show that they could predict stroke risk. And that was key, right, for CMS Absolutely. And for the hospital systems. But by and large, I think that, what really innovators need to think about is going back to who is the stakeholder that we need to bring the value story to? And is it providers, or is it patients? Who is it in terms of how is that technology really bringing value? Because the value on a fee-for-service type of payment methodology is not necessarily applicable to these, to these types of technologies. So really putting that evidence generation plan together, that value proposition, understanding, I'll go back to it, understanding the stakeholders and the end user, and how your technology is bringing value, and how you can show that and demonstrate that, right, to those stakeholders, is going to be important. And it's oftentimes a contractual situation where the manufacturer of the digital health technology needs to contract with whoever is at financial risk. Maybe it's the payer, maybe it's an integrated delivery network, hospital system provider, but really bringing that value and contracting with them directly in a subscription model. But it's not a typical fee-for-service type of model.
Yeah. Tonya, I think that's great, because it really, we talk about this day in and day out with our clients. Whether you do fall under that coding coverage payment, it still is all about value, right? Yep. Like, it's all about the value that your technology is bringing to patients, to hospitals, to the physicians that are using it, and how it's how that is changing, technology and changing standard of care. So really, right, it's all about value. And I think you've mentioned some really good tactics for these companies that don't fall under that traditional method, that going back, really understanding your evidence, understanding your stakeholders, and conveying value to those people. Yeah. I think that's incredibly important to understand.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so we have a question from the audience, and this is let me explain this nuance too. Yeah. So the question is, can you please provide a specific example of a device, implant, procedure that utilizes AI technology that struggles with establishing coding? Now, that's a good question. And here's the caveat kind of to what I was just explaining is, in that contractual arrangement that the manufacturer will have with the stakeholder or end user that's going to adopt the digital health technology or AI technology, there might be, they might require a coding mechanism to be sought or applied so they can execute the contract, right? Yep. But that's under a value-based type of contracting structure, not a fee-for-service. I think the manufacturer needs to understand that the strategy isn't necessarily all in with fee-for-service. It's contractual, but they may need to establish a code. And I think, there are many examples of those that struggle, because again, it goes back to that data, and the data that shows if you have an AI component, what value is that going to bring to maybe an existing procedure or technology, or just to the stakeholder themselves?
Yeah, it was a great question. And we have another question from the audience too. And I think this is another good one that goes kind of hand in hand with what we've been talking about. And that are what are the most important factors MedTech companies entering the US market should consider? And I actually think that we should approach this from, a European company entering the US, or a US company, coming in as new technology, because I think that the factors and considerations are the same for both.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I'll say what I always say. It's never too early to start, or too late to start, too early to start. It's never too early to start. You've got to start in parallel with your in development of your regulatory strategy. And I would say even as you're developing in the R&D phase, your technology, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's a very important consideration. Understanding the end user. So it's that, I would call it that strategic product planning, kind of strategic marketing type of effort, which a reimbursement is a component of that, and to determine the reimbursement feasibility, right, for your technology or how it's going to be reimbursed. Just like we talked about, it might not be a fee for service type of play. It might be more of a value play, but understanding and knowing that way before FDA clearance or approval is critical. And I will say this, going back to the breakthrough piece, it's important to understand if you are, from a regulatory standpoint, going for breakthrough, because that impacts, TSET aside, that could be a benefit even now with a breakthrough status. The technology may be eligible for additional payment through an NTAP or a transitional pass-through payment, even without TSET. So again, the earlier you start, the better. I can't stress that enough.
And I think to add into that, I think understanding your market is incredibly important. Understanding where your product or your technology fits into the current market is incredibly important. So I know that we talk about to our clients about this all the time. You're the world's expert, the world's leading expert on your own technology, but you also need to be an expert on your competitors, and then an expert on the journey that your product is going to take, and an expert on the people who are going to touch it and use it and how they're going to interact with it, because all of those factors are going to be vital for successful commercialization. So start early, understanding your market and understanding where your technology fits into the market. I just had a side thing because it's something that came up in a client conversation a couple weeks ago. You were mentioning breakthrough device designation. For those listening, is it too late to apply for breakthrough device if you already have your FDA clearance?
Well, it depends. So it depends on if you're going for an NTAP or transitional pass-through payment. Is a certain number of, there's a timeline that exists. So after FDA clearance or approval, you have to apply before that expiration. So potentially, depending on where they are in the market.
On where you are.
Yeah. I do want to go back to one other item that we were talking about of when is it, what are the most important factors and when do you develop your reimbursement strategy? So my esteemed colleagues did a code shopping webinar, or we did a code shopping webinar, and we did also a webinar on, what are some of the things to consider when bringing a technology to market. But, the investment community is much more sophisticated than they've ever been. And just throwing up a code, right, on a slide and saying, that's my reimbursement strategy, we have a code. We went out to Google or we looked on ChatGPT and we found a code that it sounds like it might fit our technology without understanding all of the other aspects about it, is not a reimbursement strategy. And 9 out of 10 investors will tell you that's not enough, right? So even if they understand that there's hurdles, they understand that this is a journey, be upfront and explain that you've went through that assessment and you understand, you've done the due diligence to understand it's a journey, because that will be much better received than throwing up a code on a screen and saying that's our strategy. That may or may not fit you. And I think maybe that could be a whole nother live stream discussion about why not to go code shopping because of all the reasons we know.
Exactly. No, I can't tell you how many investor conversations you and I have had over the last year together, Tonya. And the one thing that I will stress that every investor says is that it's not that you have to have an easy pathway to the market. It's not that you have to have an easy channel for reimbursement. It's that you need to have it defined and that it needs to be understood. I think we can all agree that variability is a risk. Right. So that is what, as you go through your investment planning, as you go through these series, the whole goal is to de-risk. At the beginning, you're de-risking the product, but then you have to de-risk the market. You have to de-risk after you de-risk the technology, you have to de-risk your reimbursement strategy. And the first part to that is understanding it and defining it and coming up with multiple pathways for successful reimbursement. And I think that investors across the board that we've talked to have all said the same thing, that it's not about an easy pathway. It's about really, truly having a good partner and having that pathway understood.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I think we might be out of time.
I think we are, yeah.
But I do want to just throw out there again, future topics. I think what you just talked about, having some investor representation on the next call to have that dialogue and discussion, I think would be really great. Having evidence, getting stakeholders' perspectives on how much evidence is enough, study design endpoints, what's going to resonate with a diverse stakeholder group, an ecosystem, Medicare Advantage organizations, their growth, which we all know it's growing exponentially. About 60% of Medicare beneficiaries are now in a managed care organization.
Yeah.
So what are some strategies and thoughts that the industry has around that? There was just a final rule that was published a few days ago that is going to require Medicare Advantage organizations to streamline the prior authorization process. So that's going to be of interest, I think.
Absolutely.
Healthcare provider ownerships, structures, ASC ownership by private equity firms. I mean, we could go on and on. I think we have topics to take us to the end of the year and beyond, right?
100%. But I think the point Tonya is making is that with all of these amazing topics, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to know what you want to talk about, what's important to you, where you find value. So please, anytime, connect with Tonya and I on LinkedIn. Follow priahealthcare.com and connect with us there. We have a great team that sends out emails very frequently and talks about all the things that we're doing in the market. So connect with us. Tell us what you're interested in. We will be back in February, towards the end of February, and we'll be excited to talk to you again then. And we do plan to bring in other folks into these conversations who will provide valuable insight. So we really look forward to talking to everyone again in February.
And we'll be doing these monthly. So February is the next one, March, and consecutively.
Great. Exactly.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. It was a great conversation. Thanks for participating.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Thank you.